Hello everyone, this is Raju sir briefing you and demonstrating you about the Norma Verticalis and the Norma Frontalis. Verticalis is the superior view of the skull. Here we can see the view which we are getting from above. This is called as Norma Verticalis. So the features of the Norma Verticalis will explain in detail, we'll discuss in detail. Here we can see the bones, it's almost oval in shape, and the bones which are contributing for the Norma Verticalis are the frontal bone anteriorly. We can locate the frontal bone anteriorly and the two parietal bones and the occipital bone also, partly the occipital bone also, small contribution is there from posterior side. Here you can see the occipital bone and the parietal bones and the occipital bone, and these bones are joined with the help of sutures, as we know already the fibrous type of joints. Here we can see the suture called as coronal suture, and this one is two parietal bones are joined together with the help of the sagittal suture. Usually we call the highest point of the sagittal suture is called as vertex. That's how it has got its name as the verticalis, Norma Verticalis. Here we can see the remaining features like the lambda, as we have studied while studying the Norma occipitalis. Again we recall it. Here we can see the lambda point. This point is called as lambda, the meeting point of the lambdoid suture and the sagittal suture. Rarely, in 3 to 8% of people, we may get the continuation of the sagittal suture over the frontal bone also. Such type of suture is called as Metopic Suture. Here also we will get sometimes, this is not available here. In few bones, 3 to 8%, in 100, 3 or 8 bones usually consist of Metopic Suture. And this one, the remaining features we will see. The arched roof is called as the vault of the skull. We remove the vault of the skull to study the interior of the skull is called as dome shape. Arch is called as the vault. Then we can see the bregma is a meeting point. The sagittal suture and the coronal suture. This is the point called as the bregma, and as we know, this one is the lambda, the suture, sagittal suture and the lambdoid suture, the meeting point posteriorly. This one is called as the lambda. You can see the elevations of this parietal bone. Even in our body also you can palpate them. These elevations are more prominent, and this is called as parietal tubers. Parietal tuber or parietal eminences. Parietal eminence or parietal tubers. And here you can see, as we trace the sagittal suture, we find the foramina here, this side, right side one, left side one. These are called as the parietal foramina. The point between them is called as the obelion. We call that point as the obelion. And these are the parietal foramina, usually allow the emissary veins. They will allow the emissary veins to the connecting the interior with the superior sagittal sinus, a superior sagittal sinus with the scalp. Then, as usually, from the temporal side, Norma lateralis also you can see that the same one, the continuation of the superior temporal line also can be seen. As we know, this point is called as a bregma. We also, during childhood and then during development, it was called as anterior fontanelle, which closes by 18th month. Which closes by the 18th month, like the posterior fontanelle, the lambda will close by 3rd month, and the anterolateral, the pterion, has it will be closing by the 3rd month. This one, the pterion, and usually we know all these things. And the asterion all will be closing by 12th month. So these are the points, meeting points we would like to recall along with this bregma and the lambda. I'll review the Norma Verticalis once again. Here we can see the superior, the vault, we can call it as arch shaped one. The highest point of the sagittal suture is called as the vertex. That's how it is called as the Norma Verticalis. And the parietal bones, the frontal bone and the occipital bone. The parietal bones and the frontal bone are joined by a joint called as the coronal suture. These two parietal bones are joined with the help of sagittal suture. Then the meeting point of this lambdoid suture and the sagittal suture is called as lambda, and the parietal tuber eminences. Then the parietal foramina, through which the emissary veins are connected from the superior sagittal sinus to the scalp, and this whole area is covered by the scalp layers. Now we move to the another view, and the important and usually discussed more clearly, and which is an symbol of the danger. Usually we observe it. It's a Norma frontalis view from the front side, the anterior view. Here we can see the contribution of the frontal bone and the right and left maxillae and the right and left nasal bones and the zygomatic bone as well. So these are the bones which we can see from the anterior view. I repeat, frontal bone, then the right and left maxillae, right and left nasal bones, the zygomatic bone, and the mandible also is there. It's been removed here, and we divide it for our convenience with the different region, the frontal region, the orbital region, and the lower part of the face. So for our convenience, we'll see in detail the features one by one. Here we can see this elevation over the orbit, even this wherever the eyebrows are located, we can see just above it. In our body also we can locate it, so that there is an elevation called as superciliary arch, both the sides. The point between these two is called as glabella. And at the root of the nose, we can see the meeting point of the sutures, internasal suture and the frontonasal suture. Internasal suture and the frontonasal suture. This is a meeting point, we can call it as nasion. There is a difference between nasion and the glabella. Glabella is above and the nasion is below. It's a point. Nasion is a point. And in the same manner, we can see the more prominent elevation, more prominently observed in case of females. This is called as frontal tuber or frontal eminence. Both the sides we can locate. Even we can palpate in our body also. It's more prominent in females and in children also, whereas in males it is not that much prominent. Frontal tuber or frontal eminence. Now we'll move to the orbital openings. So these are the supraorbital margin. We can see, and supraorbital notch also we can see. And sometimes it can be converted into foramen. And medial orbital margin, and the infraorbital margin also. Just below the infraorbital margin we can see the infraorbital foramen, even infraorbital foramen, where this one is the notch above and below is the foramen. And the lateral orbital margin is formed by these two bones, frontal bone and the zygomatic bone. So joining frontozygomatic suture also we can see. This is the lateral orbital margin. And we move to the aperture, nose aperture. Above boundaries we'll see lower border of the nasal bones we can locate, and below by the nasal notch and the body of the maxilla, nasal notch and the body of the maxilla. And the features, if you see, the nasal bones are joined together, articulations can see, and anteriorly with the opposite bone at the internasal sutures. Okay, you can see both the nasal bones, and posteriorly you can see the frontal process of the nasal bone posteriorly, and superiorly the frontal bone at the frontonasal suture. Frontal bone is bounded, and inferiorly is the nasal cartilage. So here there was a nasal cartilage, is been removed now, and automatically it's been removed. And the anterior nasal spine can be located. Here we can locate the anterior nasal spine. This is a point called as the rhinion, the lowmost point of this intranasal sutures, rhinion. Now we come to the face, exact face. Major portion is occupied by the maxilla, both the sides we can see, right portion and left portion. By looking into all these features, you need not worry, because we are studying only the half of the body, half of the skull even, in case of frontal view. Only one half, so no need to worry. So here we can see the facial skeleton, which is majority of the portion is occupied by the maxilla, and the maxilla has its own features, like maxilla has infraorbital foramen, and here we can see the canine fossa. These are the incisors. Here you can see the canine teeth. For that there is a deeper fossa is there, and anterior nasal spine also can be located. So parts of the maxilla, and the processes of the maxilla you can see frontal process of the maxilla, which is ascending up. Then the zygomatic process of the maxilla towards the zygomatic process, and the alveolar process of the maxilla. Alveoli means the gaps. You can see the alveolar process, which consists of the teeth commonly. Here we can locate the zygomatic bone also with its process. The actual cheek, we call it a cheek, is contributed by the zygomatic bone, and it consists of the zygomatico-facial foramen also, through which the same nerve passes. And regarding the mandible, we'll just brief about it, as it is contributing for the facial skeleton. We'll just brief about it. So there will be the lower border, it consists of, and the upper border also it consists of. Here you can see the mandible, it consists of upper border and the lower border. These are the ramus and the coronoid process, condyloid process, and the notch, mandibular notch. You can see the alveolar process consists of the teeth, and this is there will be oblique line over it. Even this is called as a ramus, and this is a pydan area over the ramus. This is the inner side. This is brief about the mandible. We'll study in detail about the mandible in a separate demonstration. Now we look at the sutures once again. The intranasal suture, we are able to locate the intranasal suture, and the frontonasal suture, and the nasomaxillary suture, nasal and the maxilla, nasomaxillary, nasal bone and the maxilla, nasomaxillary suture between these two. Then frontomaxillary suture, frontal bone and the maxilla, frontomaxillary suture, and the intermaxillary, this is intermaxillary suture. This is how you can look at intermaxillary between these two maxillae, and the zygomatico-maxillary, and the zygomatico-frontal suture also can be located. So these are the sutures. Now we move to the attachments. So here superciliary arch we had located already, so over which we can locate the corrugator superciliary muscle, and in the center wherever we have located the glabella, there we can locate the procerus muscle, and around the orbit we can locate orbicularis oculi, and the frontal process of the maxilla gives the medial palpebral ligament attachment. On the same frontal process of the maxilla gives attachment to the levator labii superioris helicanae. Levator labii superioris helicanae. The meaning of this one is the levator elevation, labii upper lip, superiorly, helicanae just beside the nose, which elevates the lip. So this is the location between the infraorbital foramen and the maxilla frontal process. Here we can locate the levator labii superioris origin, levator labii superioris, and the canine fossa. Just above the canine fossa we can locate the muscle levator anguli oris And the nasal notch, wherever the nasal notch is nearby this one, we can locate the nasalis muscle and the depressor septi muscle also can. Then wherever the incisive fossa is located here, so just above it we can locate the, wherever the depressor septi is located, just below it only you can locate the incisivus muscle also. And the zygomaticus major and minor are the one of the important muscles here. Zygomatic bone, from the zygomatic bone we can locate the zygomatic major and the zygomaticus minor and major. And the buccinator muscle arises from the both the maxilla and the maxilla, part of the maxilla from here, and from the pterygomandibular raphe also it contributes partly, the buccinator muscle. And while studying the face and the facial muscles, this will be the very important landmarks, various landmarks in which we have studied Norma frontalis, and through which various foramina, we must know the structures passing through various foramina. Supraorbital foramen are the which passes the, it is a notch, if it is covered we call it as a foramen. So usually it passes the structures with the same name, supraorbital nerves and vessels. And between the nasal bone and the upper nasal cartilage, there will be external nasal nerve which emerges, and below infraorbital foramen is transmitting the infraorbital nerve and the vessels, and the zygomaticofacial foramen passes the zygomaticofacial with the same nerve, which is a branch of zygomaticofacial nerve we call it as, and it's a branch of the maxillary nerve. And over the mandible there is a mental foramen. Here we can locate over the mandible there is a mental foramen through which the mental vessels and nerves passes through this mandible. And during falling in front, usually nasal bones are more commonly fractured, and the next bone, so the mandible and the parietal eminence in the Norma Verticalis we can see. So now I repeat once again the normal cardinal features of this Norma frontalis. We'll review. These are the frontal eminences, then the superciliary arch, the supraorbital margin, and it can be converted into the foramen through which the supraorbital vessels and nerves will pass. Then the frontal bone, frontonasal suture. These are the nasal bones, internasal suture. Then the orbital opening, you can see this is a frontal area. In the orbital openings, this is the next area which we discuss. And inside the orbit we'll discuss in detail later on, and the infraorbital margin through which the infraorbital vessels and nerves will pass. Then the cheek, zygomatic bone, zygomaticofacial foramen is there, zygomaticofacial nerve passes through this, and this is the nasal aperture, and the piriform in nature we can locate it easily. The nasal spine, the anterior continuation rhinion, then the frontal process of the maxilla and the zygomatic process of the maxilla and the alveolar process of the maxilla. The canine fossa we can locate, the canine deeper fossa. And so these are the important features. The margins we can see, the superior margin of the orbit, the medial margin of the orbit, inferior margin of the orbit, and the lateral margin of the orbit. Each and every margin of the orbit has its own peculiarity. And the major muscles like the corrugator supercilius and the procerus and the glabella wherever is there, procerus, and the zygomaticus major, minor, and the levator levae superioris, helicae nasi, even depressor septi can be located here. And the orbicularis oris is around the oral cavity that we study later on while discussing the facial muscles and all. So this is about the Norma verticalis and the Norma frontalis in detail. Thank you very much. This is not sufficient for the demonstration, and this is a guide which helps you to understand the concept of Norma verticalis and Norma frontalis. For the remaining details, you could refer the books as many as possible. Thank you very much.